Well, hello again, and welcome to Immersive Learning Graphics and Media. This is a team-based presentation. Once again, I'm Brandon Andrews, this is Dean Fouquet, and this is Alex Thomas. Each of us originally come from very different areas in the graphics and media world. Very different skill sets, at least at the onset of our careers, but we have a very common thread, and that is that we used our skills to create immersive learning simulations over the years, and also we've been teammates for at least a decade, Alex and Dean and I even longer, so, and a fairly effective team in my opinion most days. We have, yeah, there are certainly those days where they probably want to wring my neck and vice versa. But anyway, immersive learning, graphics, and media. Go forward, would you? This first thing, in my opinion, should go before this, but in my opinion, more than any other form of teaching or e-learning, immersive learning simulations can benefit from the use of graphics and media. You know, there's some great examples of text-based simulations out there. I don't want to take anything away from those wonderful simulations. But when you add that photographic or perhaps 3D CGI environment to make it contextual, you make a slick user interface that allows your students to intuitively navigate throughout your course, you add some media to bring it to life, well, you've multiplied one of the great advantages that immersive learning simulations give our students. And that inherent advantage is engagement. There's physiological changes that take place when a student is engaged in the material that opens up their mind to knowledge acquisition, to increased retention. And you know, we have a lot of power over that engagement with our graphics. It's a very powerful tool that we have at our disposal. On the flip side though, graphics and media can very often be one of the most frustrating, confusing, possibly the source of many missed deadlines. It's not uncommon for there to occur some sort of graphics review or course review, and maybe there's a member of HR department there. You've got a trainer, an instructional designer. They kind of start getting these looks on their face, which I've seen many times, and they start using these phrases like, I'm just not feeling it. I'll know it when I see it. I'll know it when I see it. And my very favorite, it doesn't give me that warm fuzzy. The elusive warm fuzzy. So who's ever in charge of creating these media and graphic components, they're left with this ambiguous gray area feedback, and they have to go back to their cubicle or their computer or their drawing board, or wherever it is they're creating these things, and they have to try again. They present again, and more often than not, they're probably faced with this same gray area feedback. So thus starts this infinite loop of try, ambiguous feedback, try again, present again, and you're left with a course where nobody's entirely happy with it. Perhaps you missed the deadline, maybe both. Okay? So the problem isn't that it's bad teamwork. It probably isn't that it's bad design. More often than not, the problem is it's bad communication. This communication when it comes to design and media production does not come naturally to most people. Good communication does not come naturally to most people. Unless you're an experienced designer or AV professional, have some sort of formal background in it. It's just most people view it as a very subjective art form and not an objective science. Well, it can be a mix of both. It really can. And it'll help you get to your solution much easier, much faster, and much better if you apply a bit of objectivity and science to this communication process. Fair warning, nobody's going to leave this 40-45 minute session being a graphic designer or an AV pro, unless you already are. Unless you already are.
There's hopes shattered.
Sorry, yeah. What we do hope you leave as, though, is a person better equipped to communicate in the process. A person better to hold these conversations. Conversation might be between you and a teammate. It might be between you and a vendor, you and a client. It might very well be between you and yourself. Maybe you're responsible for creating these media components. A lot of you come from small development shops. Might be a small development shop within a really large organization, but small nonetheless, and you have to wear all these hats. And one of them might be graphic designer and AV professional. Okay? And maybe at the end of the day, your 8, 10, 12-hour day, you look at the media that you've created and you go, you know what, that just doesn't give me a warm fuzzy. Well, you can have this conversation with yourself. You know, so we're going to kind of take an old school design approach as far as reviews. We're just going to rapid fire go through a bunch of examples. And we're going to just teach you, hopefully, some methods that you can apply to identify problems, perhaps identify solutions, but more importantly, we're also going to talk about how you might communicate those problems and how you might communicate those solutions in a constructive way. All right? Sound good? So first, I want to start with the first concept, and I believe it's often the most overlooked. However, I feel it's the most foundational. I feel like if you do overlook it, you're going to cause yourself the most problems. And that first step is storyboards. It's amazing how many design and media production cycles begin with nothing more than a conversation, if that. Just a conversation. And storyboards, I think it's intimidating for a lot of people. I think, you know what, I'm not an illustrator. I need to create these polished things. I'm not Steven Spielberg. I've got a budget of $1,500. You know, let's just talk about what we need to get done here and let's get it done. Well, let me give you a kind of hypothetical, you know, situation here. You've got teammate 1 and teammate 2. Teammate 1 says to teammate 2, okay, I've been working on these learning objectives and kind of writing up this course that we need to get done. And basically what we want to do is we want to teach people how to change a tire. We want to teach people how to change a tire, step them through the process, give them an inventory of tools. Maybe at any point in the process they can pick a tool, apply it to that step in the process so we can know that they know what the steps are, what the tools are. You get what I'm saying? They're like, yeah, sure, I get what you're saying. Okay, go off and make yourself some graphics and then meet me back here in 2 days and I'll see what you got. So they come back with this. Got the flat tire on there, steps them through it, they've got their tools. Okay, that looks pretty good. But teammate 2 is, you missed it. You know, we are in deep trouble now because this thing is due 2 days from now, and this is not what I wanted at all. What they wanted was this. You know, they wanted a bicycle. You know, they wanted a bicycle, they wanted an illustrative look, they wanted lots of white space. So this all could have been avoided if they would have just done this. This is a storyboard. It can be on a napkin. It can be on a piece of paper. They didn't have to draw a bicycle. They drew a circle where they kind of wanted the bicycle placed. They put bicycle illustration with flat tire. Kind of put what they want. There's more text notes on this thing than there are drawings. Okay? So this becomes the foundation. This is the graphic and media equivalent of creating your learning objectives at the beginning of your course design. It's the foundation upon which it's all built. Just this simple drawing. It takes no longer than the conversation did, but it creates a map, it orients the team, and it's sort of an informal contract. You know, it's okay, we sat down, we drew this together, this is what we're going for. Save a tremendous amount of time. Most of our courses, they aren't just a static screen. So then you take this, go ahead, Dean, and just create a few of them. And then you can make notes how things progress. And you fleshed out your contract. So pull out the napkin when you're having your initial conversation. At the very least, pull out the napkin and sketch this stuff up. Okay, so that's just the first rule that I would like to impart to you, is don't skip the storyboard phase. Okay, so now examples, second only to storyboards, where I normally notice the most problems in people's design and media production is user interface. You know, the things outside of the virtual world that maybe house your feedback, your navigation, buttons, things of that nature. For some reason, second only to storyboards, I feel like that's a problem area. I have a checklist. I have a checklist that I go through in my head when I'm reviewing user interfaces. And it's 4 phrases. I go through them. The phrases are private property, the invisible interface, reality check, and glance guidance. So going through these one at a time. Go ahead, Dee. Private property. Private property to me means every element on the stage in the interface has its own private property. And it will always stay within its private property, and no other element will encroach into its private property. So you don't want your buttons moving around. You don't want buttons swapping out over other buttons. This is just going to save yourself confusion, save students confusion. Let's take a look at that. Let's say that that's a pretty nice interface. I think so. Let's this first stage. We go to a decision point stage. All of a sudden okay, there's a continue button up there when this came. So I guess I want to hit continue after I'll hit submit. So we go ahead and make a decision, hit submit. The guide coach comes out. Okay, so I want to hit continue. Oh, well, my continue button's down here. That was where the print button was. Okay. All right, so, and this is a fairly simple example, but it's just confusing. And what you've done, whenever a student becomes confused with your user interface, you break that suspension. You break down that wall that you're trying to create where they're engaged. And even if it's just a moment, you've lost that, and they've got to reboot the experience. Because they had to step out of that virtual reality and they've had to figure something out. So, how would we communicate this to ourselves, to our teammate? We might say something like this. Might we say something like this? Not keeping consistent placement of the UI elements is going to confuse our students. Let's find a location for our buttons and keep them there for the duration of the course. Okay? You've taken the ambiguity out of your statement and you've told them what the problem is, you've told them what the solution is, and you're well on your way to a better course. All right. Oh, so they come back a day later, they've got a placement for each of their buttons, they stay there for the duration of the course. Student isn't confused. You don't break that engagement. Next one, the invisible interface. What the invisible interface says to me after I've thought about private property, the invisible interface says to me that I want my interface to not be noticed by the student. I only want the student to notice my interface when they need to notice it. You don't want to distract from the area, the thing, the environment, whatever it is that you're simulating, whatever you're creating virtually, that's where you want them to be. That's where you want them to forget that they're sitting at their desk. You want them to be in the desk with her. Now, if you start using, you can't really tell on the projector, but this is more of a god-awful orange. You don't want annoying animations. You don't want overbearing sound effects. You don't want bright colors, big graphical elements. Okay, you want the interface to fade back into the background. Okay, so what might we say to a person who presents this design to us? Go ahead, Dean. The colors and the large graphical elements and the animations are drawing too much attention to the interface. We need to focus the student's attention on the virtual reality components of our simulation and let the interface disappear. Might also add, go ahead and go forward and see what they come back. So they come back and they've got, they've knocked this back to a nice neutral, they've gotten rid of the animation, they've gotten rid of the big graphical element. She's a video, so their attention's going to be there. We've created a visual hierarchy. You want to think in terms of visual hierarchy. Where do I want the student to look first, and where do I want him to look second? So hopefully, especially since she's moving around talking, first, second. We don't have the animation that's drawing their attention and all that other stuff. I meant to add to the beginning and at the end, if we have time, we're going to have a quick quiz. So we're going to throw up a bunch of random examples, and you're going to identify what's wrong, a possible solution, and how you would communicate the problem solution to whoever it is that needs communicating to. All right, so the next point on our checklist for UI is the reality check. What reality check says to me is I want to create a physical separation between my UI elements, between my non-virtual elements, and my virtual elements. Okay, so let's say that we're doing this course and we've got our agent here, who is our virtual agent that we're wanting to actually interact with. And after we interact with her, the guide coach walks out behind the desk and starts giving us some feedback. The continue button's here. Well, wait a minute. Is she in the environment or is she in my UI environment? For a moment, that suspension of disbelief is gone. And you've lost that engagement, and they've got to reboot. So you want to really drive home the idea of the elements that are outside of your virtual world. Okay, so we might say to ourselves, by placing feedback and interface elements within our virtual environment, we're breaking the virtual experience for the student. We need to separate the feedback and interface elements from the virtual simulated elements. So they take your advice, come back, they've knocked back the environment with this screen, so now when this screen's back, they know, okay, we're out of the virtual environment now, I'm going to get some non-virtual feedback. The guide coach walks out, we've separated, we've taken her, put her in front of the interface actually, so we've made a physical distinction between virtual and non-virtual. Last point on my personal checklist of UI rules, glance guidance. Glance guidance, the idea to me is that when a student interacts, I want to give them feedback as soon as possible as to what their decision resulted in. And that feedback, oftentimes, I believe, needs form and color to help relay that immediately. So, you know, that keeps them in the rhythm of the simulation, I would call it, you know. So it's quick. So I interact here. I'm looking, okay, interviewing simulation, you're making good decisions and moving the interview forward. Feedback, good job. So I've got my feedback now, I read it. But it took too long. It took way too long. Especially if you're doing that 20, 24 times in a simulation, reading the whole screen every time. So I might say something, you know, the student's not going to know where to look first for their feedback. They're going to have to read the whole screen to find out what's important. We need to give the student feedback using form, bless you. Form and color in order to give them quick, immediate feedback after an interaction. Take our advice, they come back. It's hard to see on the screen projector once again, but there's 4 green bars here now that coincide with our feedback. Maybe with mediocre feedback, there's 3 yellow. Maybe with bad, there's 1 red. But immediately upon interaction, boom, they see that change. And whether they read it or not, they know that they've done a good job. Maybe they put a gauge over here, and so they see an animation of this thing going left and right, maybe perhaps for cumulative type feedback. Okay, so you've got your single stage feedback, you've got your cumulative over here. And then if they want to dive a little deeper into the feedback, good job. You're making decisions and moving the interview forward. Yes, sir?
Just an observation I've noticed in a number of the examples that you've given, and from a psychological reason, there may be a reason for a rationale for that. Everything from where I'm sitting always seems to shift left.
Oh, for the good example?
Yeah, and even, well, like most of the stuff is shifted left there, you see.
Yeah.
Most of the graphics. Is that intentional, or is that just, even she is slightly left?
Well, I'll tell you why we do it,
okay.
and it's probably just ingrained in the next learn the way we do things, quite frankly, is because most of the time we have our decision point box come up over here.
Okay.
And so that's a heavily weighted object, and once again, we want their eye to go there, so we normally reserve this space. And when that comes up, we don't want it necessarily coming over and cutting off half her face, because then that becomes, you know, disconcerting. Yeah.
But
so
even at the bottom, I know, even when outside of that, everything shifts left, and I just, it got annoying actually yesterday, but it was just an
That's the natural direction your eye goes.
Yeah.
Left to right,
That's how we read things.
left to right. Yeah, left to right, top to bottom is kind of a nice rule. But if I really had to keep going back to it, I would say it's because the decision point box, especially in this layout, and in a lot of next learn layouts, actually, it appears right here.
Because I know in Asia we tend to shift it the other way.
Oh, that's a good point.
And I guess I'm just sensitive to that.
Yeah, and cultures it's right to left and you know, top to bottom. So yeah, John.
Can you speak a moment to the association between the private property and reality check in terms of like using the continue button within the sim and also to move past the coaching?
Yeah.
Should you have a unique continue button just for the coach?
Yeah, you know, you said private property reality check. A lot of these overlap. I mean, you use them in conjunction with each other to create a whole approach. As far as the continue button, yeah, you know, does it break somebody's engagement because they have to hit continue every time after an agent responds, after they get feedback? We normally, now there's some cases where you need to hit continue because perhaps the student case that you want to give your students the ability to go backwards and learn by experiencing many different realities. You know, so the continue becomes necessary just as a navigational component to allow the things you're doing within the sim. I prefer a sim that requires the least amount of clicking. I prefer that, but the reality is a lot of times you just have goals of the simulation that you have to put in clicks. But my overall goal when I'm designing a course is always to reduce the amount of clicks. If I see a place that you can reduce it, then you can get rid of a click, I get rid of it. Because that's just one more place. Now that's not to say that I don't like the student to have to interact a lot. I think you need to have the student interacting often. That's part of that engagement. If you sit there and you have to sit through 15 minutes of video and text before you're even, allowed to make a simple little decision, that's too long, and you've zoned out. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I was interested in whether the same button, from this point of view,
can do different. You can have different applications within the course.
It's either close the coach,
right,
or move the simulation forward. But depending on what the mode the screen's in at the time, it does something.
Yeah, you have to be careful. Like for example, on the coach, a lot of times it'll be skip. A skip button will skip the coach, whereas a continue will continue through the simulation.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? In the professional version, do you have rulers or grid lines?
No. No, but yeah, that's great. You should write that down on the park. Is that a parking lot? That's a good idea.
Yeah.
And that's SimWriter in
There's
general.
alignment tools.
There's alignment tools, but there's not a grid. So if you want to pick 2, 3, 4 elements and hit align left, they're all going to align left with each other.
But if you're adding an individual button to each slide, you kind of have to eyeball it.
You can write
So
that.
you can use coordinates or copy paste on stages or templates. And then paste in the same templates.
Yeah, there's a number of ways. There's templates. Copy paste always puts it in the exact same spot. And then there's coordinates. So you could always just see what the coordinate
So a
is.
template, you could in essence apply a template that would have just a button, but put that button in the same spot.
Absolutely. Yes.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah. All kinds of neat little things. And this is how SimWriter has grown actually over the years. It started as an internal tool that allowed us to do things more efficiently and better. And as we had ideas that would allow us to do things more efficiently and better, we'd build them in. And then one day, one of our customers wanted to see the tool, and so we let them see it, and it became a public-facing type software package. And it continues to grow by internal needs and customer needs. So it's a very organic, does what you need type of tool. All right, so next one, glance guidance. I'm sorry. So we covered glance guidance. Consistency and composition. These are a couple of terms that there's about 3 or 4, I think, terms under each of these ideas that if you think through them as you're reviewing your design, it'll help you. So let me just go through those real quick. So consistency. We'll start with consistency. Go ahead. Let's see. Consistency. Have a lot of inconsistent elements. So consistency is basically, you want to limit your fonts. It's first big rule. I see so many times where people come out and they've got 6 or 7 fonts, different styles on the fonts. Pick one font. Just do yourself a favor, pick one font and stick with it. Maybe if you want to draw some attention, make it bold. Try to limit your font sizes also. Okay? Second is to keep your colors to a certain scheme. All right, so try to pick a color scheme that works and then stick with it. Try to imply it on your UI, your environment, wherever, as much as you can. A lot of people say, I can't match colors. Well, do you have an outfit you like? Look at your outfit, pick the colors from that. Do you have a sports team you like, other than the Miami Dolphins? Because now I look at that, it kind of looks like a Miami Dolphins color scheme, so don't go for the Miami Dolphins. But do you have a sports team you like? Maybe pull the colors from that. Okay, or if all else fails, you know what, go out on the web, find a site that you like, and rip those colors off. Nobody has a patent on color.
There's also Adobe Kuler, K-U-L-E-R.
Okay.
That has a color palette, so you pick a color that you like, and it will do the various
cool.
color combinations.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's a really, really awesome tool. Not only can you do, it's complementary colors, but you can do tangential colors. You can save out your scheme.
Yeah.
And if you're using Illustrator or Photoshop, you can import that color scheme into your production. It's a great tool, and it's free.
How do you spell it?
K-U-L-E-R.
I've never heard of that. That sounds really cool.
It's KULER.adobe.com. If you try to go to KULER,
So it's a web app?
It won't
Yeah.
work. So
Free web
you
app.
have to have the subdomain KULER.adobe.com.
Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, that sounds really neat. Kuler and then .adobe. Okay. And you know, another good way to help yourself out is just go with a neutral color scheme. You know, if you're feeling really unsure about your color picking abilities, go with neutrals, grays, you know, things like that, blacks, whites. Can't really go wrong. They can't go wrong, but it's hard to. All right, and use elements that are similar in look and feel. So, you know, we look at this. We've got this illustrative guy here who's saying, say it. We've got this video photo agent. We've got a number of different fonts. We've got a color scheme that isn't working. Got some texture on here, but so consistency's been thrown out of the window on this. So what might we say? I see a few consistency problems that if we solve will improve the design and the layout. And you have several different fonts. Let's pick one or two and stick with those. I also noticed that you're mixing illustrative elements with photorealism. We should pick one style and stick to it. Also, let's pick a color scheme. Okay. So they take your advice, they come back, they've gone with neutrals for the color scheme, they have one font, they've gotten rid of the illustrative and just gone with photorealism. Looks a little better. Okay. And the next term, composition. There's several ideas behind composition. You want to create that visual hierarchy. That's where this kind of comes in. Where do you want the eye to go first? Where do you want it to go second? Utility of space, you don't want to clutter. If it's just feeling uncomfortable, take a look and see if you're trying to get too many elements on the screen at one time. Okay. Repetition, this kind of ties into a couple of other concepts that we've talked about, but you want to pick a style and you want to stick with it. If you're using Arial 12-point font for your decision points, left justified, then every time you have decision points, you need to have Arial 12-point font left justified. Stick with it. Okay? And then alignment. This gets back to kind of what you were talking about, alignment. You want to impose this grid over your design, and then you want to have as many elements as you can lining up with each other, just to make it comfortable. Okay? And there are some tools in SimWriter that allow you to do that. So, what would we say? Yeah, I see a few problems with the composition. The decision points look very crowded. Go back. Can you go back? So they're right up against this decision point box. So white space is a good thing. Empty space is a good thing. You know, you can also call it a gutter. But give each one of your elements, give them some room. You know, give them some room to breathe. Okay, sorry, go ahead. I see a few problems with composition. The decision points look very crowded. That can be helped if we have some empty space around them, also called a gutter. Also, the decision points aren't consistent. There are a couple that are centered and a couple that are left justified. Let's pick a style and stick with it. And overall, we need to make sure all of our elements are aligned with each other. They take your advice under consideration and they come back with this. They've gotten rid of the coach mentor, they put her on the next screen. They've given themselves some gutter. They've left justified all of this. They've aligned elements whenever possible, so it all feels a lot better. All right, so now I'm going to hand the mic over, metaphorically, to Alex so he can cover some media concepts.
Hello, everybody. You probably see me over the last day shoving a camera in your face. And I apologize for that, but it's been fun. And today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about some common issues in media, and photography, audio, video, and help you to understand how to identify some issues, avoid some issues. I look at media in immersive learning as a very important tool, of course, because if it's done well, you're barely going to notice it. You're going to be immersed in the simulation. I liken it to a good drummer in a band. You're never going to go away from hearing a great band saying, man, that drummer was really good. At least most of you won't. If you're into music, maybe you will, but at first blush, a good drummer just doesn't make a mistake. You know, it's seamless. He's seamless, and so the thing with media is that if it does have some problems with it, you're going to notice it and take you out of that immersive situation. So let's look at the first example here. Oh my goodness, it's my daughter, Lucille. I don't know how she appeared in this presentation, but what she is doing is illustrating how this photo is not being used at its natural resolution. If you look closely, there's basically, it's been enlarged past to cover an area that it's not intended to cover. The original image here is more like a 300 pixel wide photo, and we're trying to fill a 900 pixel wide space. And thus the image gets blown out, but to simply just tell a media professional that this photo is blurry is not going to give them the proper idea of what's going on. You can see how it has been enlarged and is causing, the breakup of the image. Let's look up the next image. There she is, again, a little bit better, but even more so on the projector, you can tell that she's blown out. Like this, she's wearing a pink outfit, and up here it almost looks white, and the light is very harsh. And that's something you'll see in acquiring your photographs quite often, is using harsh light. You've seen me walk around here today and yesterday using a diffuser on my flash, and what this does is it softens up the light and just spreads the light out evenly. This one goes on top of my flash. Of course, if you're using a regular point shoot, there's plenty of offerings out there in the marketplace to help diffuse the light, soften it up. Of course, with this photo in an immersive situation, your learner is going to just be taken aback at how obvious it is that you acquired the photo and that you were using a flash, because it's pretty obvious it's blowing out the photo. So let's go to the next example. This is soft light, appropriate resolution. The rich colors come through. You can see that this is purple and she's wearing pink, at least on the screen, a little bit better. And the harsh light is no longer there. It's soft light, allowing for a lot of contrast to come through, and it's a more appealing photo. So, those few examples, although they are extreme, will help you communicate with your media professionals to help acquire good media and keep the immersiveness of your simulations intact. The next example I have is an audio example. Let's go ahead and play that example.
Welcome to the Next Learn Immersive Learning University Conference. Enjoy your time in New Orleans.
Now, that's seemingly okay, but it sounds pretty digitized. It's not extremely clear, a little bit of a hiss. And what we're seeing there is audio being over-compressed. There's too much compression on it. You're trying to squash that file size down, and a good way to communicate to the media professional in that scenario is not just saying, well, it sounds a little rough. I mean, that doesn't give them enough information. Giving them more specifics when you hear that hiss and hear that kind of echoey sound, you will be able to tell them that, hey, we can maybe not compress that file as much, make it sound more natural. Of course, again, leading to it not being as noticeable to the learner that they can just be focused on the learning. Let's look at the next example. Welcome to the Next Learn Immersive Learning University Conference. Enjoy your time in New Orleans. Better on the compression, but of course you heard some background noise. And that was pretty obvious, but in a lot of situations we're going to be talking about when you're in your audio booth, just think about the little things, like an air conditioner vent running. I mean, hearing those kind of background noises can be picked up in your audio booth, and for the learner, it can be distracting. Now, I know it's a fine line because we're talking about immersive, and in the real world, there are background noises. But for these purposes, you really want them focused on the content you're delivering, on the media you're delivering. So it's best to isolate yourself in a room and avoid all extraneous sounds. Try to be aware of street noises that may be coming through, and also be aware that you should maybe try to isolate yourself as much, even with the most rudimentary options. A mattress, for instance, can work well to isolate a sound, a wall, or help protect from sound bleeding in to your recording booth.
On those little lights. Phone.
I think you found the median, which is the middle number of the ordered data. You need to find the mean, which is the total number of nuclear power plants, and divide by the number of years.
Here we have a simple video, and you can tell how bad it is when it stops on the still, but again, this is a compression issue. obviously overcompressed. It's digitized in the face. You can see that once it starts going, it's just choppy. It's going to distract the learner, and an easy way to communicate that with your media professionals are basically that let up on the compression. Maybe we can take a hit on bandwidth and get a little higher quality out of that video.
Did you recognize that all of the previous choices were actually correct? When sharing with clients the benefits of simulations, mention the 3 common uses: as self-directed, pre-work assignments that employees complete before they attend facilitated professional development sessions, as
Still
standalone
compressed,
learning tools
obviously,
integrate
but
their existing
much
training.
smoother, and it will allow for the learner to focus on what the message is rather than what the message looks like. I mean, it's obviously compressed enough to be delivered in the form factor we want it to, but not be distracting. I think it's time for the quiz.
Sure. I might also mention
that most all of these techniques and communications techniques cost little to no money. So, oh, sorry, I thought you had a question, Kurt. All right, so let's go through these. You'll have a chance to win one of the infamous Next Learn monkeys. So I'll take volunteers. We're going to look at examples. You're going to tell me what's wrong with it and how you might communicate that. First one's up. Maybe.
I was thinking. It takes too long to load.
Correct.
Yeah, it takes the
Yeah, here you go. File is too big.
Compression issue. While that's doing that,
You might restart.
how do you, we are in control of most of our graphics, but when we do have our creative services folks, they're all about their artistic integrity, and they don't want to give us what we're asking for, regardless. And then if you don't like what you get, it may be months or never that you get what you get.
Your best bet is if you approach it scientifically. And you don't just tell them, hey, I'm not getting what I want something that's cleaner. If you use terms and you apply more of a scientific, objective type approach with your communication with them, they will be able to argue it as well. They're like, well, okay, gosh, she knew about alignment, she knew about my consistency problems. I better pick up my game here. So that would be,
Yeah, I've actually given them an example of this exact same thing, but I wanted it someone in uniform.
Right.
Close.
Sounds like it might be more of a performance issue.
Not the entire department does that, I should say.
This one.
This is a question about file types for video. Is there a preferred file type, or one that kind of across the board is always compressed too much?
You mean in terms of SimWriter, or?
Yeah, like if I want to put in a video clip, would an MP4 be too compressed? Usually, should I go with like?
It really depends on the situation for the video. So there are a couple variables there. One would be, is there high movement in the video? Another would be, are you using an alpha channel, which would knock out like the background of it, like if you're shooting against a green screen, and you're trying to have motion behind that video, and also the details of the background on the video will contribute to that as well. I mean, there are a lot of contributing factors. Generally speaking, we use SWIFTs in SimWriter because we find that they're less processor intensive for what we're wanting to do. FLVs can be used in SimWriter, but I believe there's some issues with FLVs on mobile deployment, so you might want to stay away from that. But yeah, in terms of compression, there's a lot of variables there, and it just really depends. You kind of have to find out what works best for you. We use Sorensen Squeeze, which offers a lot of different compression options.
And at the end of the day, it just needs to play. So if you have to compress something down to get it to play, I mean, if it doesn't play, then all is lost.
And we do a lot, I mean, in terms of working with those file sizes, I mean, cropping video areas, trying to get as small a video box as possible if we're wanting more quality out of the video, so it just really depends.
What is your experience or advice in terms of accents and interrupting the experience of a participant in the simulation? in particular, the type of accent that the speaker has, and how do you manage that?
We use typically, other than of course the examples you see that we pulled in, NextLearn employees, we use professional talent whenever possible, and we have a fairly rigid screening process and audition process also. You know, our studio is actually in Wichita, Kansas, which it's amazing how many different dialects there are. You get the real southern twang sometimes, you'll get a northern sort of, so it's almost like it's crossroads literally of a lot of dialects. So we have to be careful and mindful of that, because especially if we're going to a U.S. Domestic audience, some dialects can just be distracting. You spend too much time thinking, my gosh, the twang that guy has is just over, you lose the content. So you do have to be mindful of it. I don't know what the solution is. You can't teach somebody how to speak differently. All you can do is get your talent. And we do a lot of things internationally also, so we'll have to do, British English, and so it becomes trickier because I don't know, what is a distracting British accent, So then you have to bring in SME, so basically it's SME for that.
It looks like in the backgrounds for the simulations that you displayed, they're not actual photos of like real stuff.
Yeah.
Do you find there's an advantage to less distraction with that as opposed to like a real conference room?
There's a number of reasons that we use 3D when possible. And I love photographic backgrounds, especially if you're working with a company that has very unique environments that you need to, because it can be distracting if, that doesn't look like where I work. But we use 3D. First, like you're saying, oftentimes it's much easier to compress because you can get much more solid colors. You have a lot more control over the light. And also, it becomes an environment that you can go back to. If I need a different little shot here, I can move it over. But you can't necessarily go have a photo shoot at somebody's office again and again. So it becomes much more reusable, leverageable over time. So that's why oftentimes you'll see our products with 3D backgrounds. But there's a lot of products that we've done out there too that have photographs.
What do you, I've never done those before. What software do you use to create those?
The 3D?
Yeah.
Right now we're using Cinema 4D. And it's a very easy, intuitive package. I would say it's mid-range in price. You've got the upper tier, which is like 3DS, 3D Max, Maya, which are pretty expensive. Then you've got this, which I think you get into for around $4,000. A nice package on the lower end of price is Strata. It's still a nice one that's easy to use. And Blender. Blender is actually a free open source. Or not open source, it's free. I don't think it's open source. I'm not sure.
Well, I use a software called Poser.
Yes.
And Poser is much cheaper. And what you do is you can go to 3D website and purchase models. So like for me, when I created this Broadway van thingy, I purchased a van, bring it to Poser, set up the lighting, which is not that hard to do. The characters, buy some clothes for them because otherwise they just come as models. And I know, the funny story is like, when I set up the character, I'm just so afraid my boss is gonna walk in and wonder what I'm working with. Just characters.
We had another, if you're looking at 3D avatars, I might throw this out there too, look up Code Baby. It's a real nice, it's basically like buying a box of puppets, and you take them out and you apply a movement to it and it does it. It can be limiting in the fact that there's only so many movements, but there's actually quite a few and it might fit your needs.
With the pro version of SimWriter, you get dozens of backgrounds included with simplicity that you can buy those individually.
Totally.
I was just going to add to your comment about your backgrounds, and this, mine's sort of a nitpicky issue.
Sure.
One of the reasons why I really like NextLearn's backgrounds is that the angle is just right for dropping in video. They don't look like, the floor is not skewed. Sometimes when you get pictures, the angle in which they took that photograph does not gel well with your video. They look like they're floating, or so that's another good reason why they're.
And that's the way in 3D that you can really control, what your shot is. Whereas photographs, We've actually ran out of time and we need to get down to lunch. So I'm just going to throw out some monkeys here, I guess. And I apologize we didn't get to this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actual not too smart.
Yeah.